If you truly love something, you have to let it go. As mortals, that's something that we have to learn. There is an expiration date for everything. Even shows like King of the Hill. When it wrapped up in 2009, I was sad, but it ended on a high note. I always wondered, should it have ended? Maybe not, but, it went out with some dignity at least. When the news broke that Arlen's Finest was returning in 2025, I'll admit, I was a bit nervous. Maybe even a little bit excited. Cartoon reboots really haven't had a great track record, but when season 14 hit, well, color me surprised. The writers pulled it off. They even had an anime-style time jump, and it really worked well for the plot. Sure, it spent a lot of time catching up with characters, rather than progressing in small individual stories, but it really did catch me off guard, and it blew me away. It really was surprising. Season 14 gave me hope. But what about the season that just dropped? 15. That, in my mind, well, that was going to be the real proving ground.
King of the Hill is fully back to the status quo. And I mean that in the best way possible. Back to basics here doesn't mean resetting growth. It means the show isn't wasting time establishing where people are anymore. The characters have room to breathe. Bobby isn't endlessly chasing new girls. His relationship with Connie is tested, but ultimately strengthened. Hank isn't desperately looking for hobbies to fill his time. Best of all, Hank and Bobby aren't constantly at each other's throats like they are last season. They still headbutt, like when Hank falls victim to a hilariously modern phone scam, but the constant friction is dialed back for a much better father-son dynamic. If you're a Peggy fan, Season 15 completely makes up for benching her during the early revival. Classic Peggy is back in full force, braggadocious, misguided, but ultimately willing to learn, even if it takes her a while. Take episode 4. Peggy takes a poetry class, and Min follows along just to flex on her. But when the instructor pairs them together, something magical happens. Peggy's relentless optimism mixes with Min's raw rage over her divorce with Khan, turning them into a surprisingly brilliant poetic duo. Of course, Peggy being Peggy, she stumbles. Desperate to get published in the class poetry book, she ends up sabotaging Min's newfound happiness when Min decides to date a classmate instead of staying angry. It's a light B story, but it lands that classic King of the Hill landing where Peggy actually learns a lesson. The absolute peak of classic Peggy, though, comes in episode 5. Hank and Peggy go to church, and Pastor Stroop invites them to a couple's counseling retreat. Peggy's massive ego immediately convinces her that they're being brought to teach young couples how to have a perfect marriage. Her dreams are utterly crushed when she finds out Dale and Nancy are leading the workshop instead, while Peggy gets stuck on the kitchen duty and Hank gets assigned to fix repair work. Now, Hank, being handed a list of handyman projects, is basically his version of Disneyland, so he goes from resistant to thrilled. Peggy goes from excited to deeply resentful, and frankly, you kind of side with her. Dale and Nancy's marriage is famously built on decades of infidelity that literally everyone in Arlen knows about except for Dale. But that's where the episode shines. It forces Peggy and the audience to realize that despite their chaotic history, Dale and Nancy somehow make their bizarre dynamic work. Peggy comes to terms with the fact that her own marriage isn't flawless, and that even a seemingly disastrous union like the Gribbles has a genuine merit. It's just solid character writing top to bottom. Speaking of character growth, let's look at Hank in episode 4's main plot. Bobby asks Hank to run his food truck at a local sci-fi convention. Hank loves the idea of driving the truck and hand-delivering flyers, but he immediately gets stonewalled by cosplayers. No one over the age of 12 should be playing make-believe. That's a direct quote. The brilliance of the episode comes when Bill Dauterive becomes the voice of reason. Bill points out to Hank that adults painting their faces and wearing jerseys for football games is literally the exact same thing as nerds dressing up like aliens. Hank is stunned, mostly because the logic came from Bill, but he actually listens. He sits down, watches the sci-fi movie the con is based on, makes peace with the nerds, and helps his son out. Oh, and side note, Bill casually drops his knowledge of hentai in this episode, Never in my wildest dreams did I think I'd hear the word hentai in King of the Hill, but 2026 is full of surprises. Now, if there's one area where season 15 stumbles a bit, it's the weird dynamic between Bill and Khan. Khan is no longer living in Min's garage. He's moved across the street to roommate with Bill. On paper, it's a funny premise, but the execution flips back and forth. In episode 2, Bill acts as the caretaker, helping a grieving post-divorce Khan. By episode 6, Khan is back on his feet, buying Bill a toupee and helping him manage his own health. But by episode 8, when Bill gets sucked into a bizarre cuddle therapy group, the show completely forgets Khan even lives there. Watching Hank shudder during a puppy pile hug is hilarious, but sacrificing Khan and Bill's established bond for a quick gag felt like a, let's say, step backwards. Where this season really excels is how it tackles modern culture. King of the Hill has always had its finger on the pulse of blue-collar America, dealing with stuff like electric cars, AI phone scams, and retail stores locking toothpaste behind glass cases. Episode 6 stands out in particular. Peggy starts going through a rough patch with menopause, but instead of just focusing on her pain, the story becomes a showcase for what a devoted husband Hank is. Hank hates public affection. The mere thought of discussing a woman's bodily function gives the man a near-fatal panic attack. Yet he upgrades the house's AC to help Peggy's hot flashes, buys menopausal advice books online, completely ruining his search algorithm, and ultimately drives all the way to New Mexico to buy her medical cannabis remedies. Seeing Hank step completely out of his comfort zone and cross state lines for something he fundamentally disapproves of just to help his wife is deeply touching. It gives Peggy the boost she needs to get back on her feet. Then there's episode 7, which might be the most unique episode of the season. Boomhauer is left babysitting Luke Jr., and struggles to connect with him until they start tending to a flock of chickens Dale bought to bypass high grocery egg prices. Luke Jr. bonds with a timid hen named Bertrude, only for his agricultural teacher to reveal that Bertrude is undergoing a rare biological shift, turning from a hen into a rooster. When Luke enters Bertrude into a rooster calling contest, a rival family protests, claiming it's unfair and unnatural for a former hen to compete. It's an obvious, subtle allegory for modern transgender debates. Hank even points out in classic Hill fashion that it doesn't really matter what Bertrude was born as, because the chicken probably won't be good at rooster calling anyway, which turns out to be true. But the heart of the story isn't the politics, it's watching the former Playboy Boomhauer step up and learn how to be a supportive father figure.
Well, there you have it. Season 15 in the books. I could talk about King of the Hill all day long, but we don't really have the time. Now, it proved to me that since 2009, there's been a Texas-sized hole in my heart and in the adult animation business. The grounded, relatable issues, no other show tackles them like King of the Hill. It's still a cartoon, of course, with plenty of pizzazz to keep you watching, and it's not too preachy with all the topics either, which is the perfect mixture in my opinion. Season 15 proves that these characters still have a lot to give. Yeah, of course they're flawed, but who isn't? Again, that's why everyone and all these topics are so relatable. After all these years, it feels like checking up on the family again, you know? But that's just me. What did you think? What were your favorite quotes? What were your favorite episodes? What flaws did you think it had? In a calm and constructive manner, of course. But like, subscribe, and until next time, tell him Hank sent ya.